You ever look around a house you built with your own hands and realize the laughter inside? It doesn't sound like yours anymore. That was me that Saturday afternoon. The Jeffrey estate, my father's old mansion, was full of balloons, pink ribbons, and the sugary echo of a child's birthday song. My granddaughter turned 5 that day. She had frosting on her cheek and a bow in her hair, running between the legs of grown-ups who barely looked at one another. I'm Daniel Jeffrey, but most people in this town still call me Dan, the man who walked away from his father's millions to become a contractor. I used to pour concrete and sleep in pickup trucks while my son, Drew, grew up watching other kids get what he couldn't. Maybe that's where the distance started. Back then, I told myself I was teaching him grit. What I didn't realize was that I was also teaching him resentment. The garden smelled of barbecue smoke and cut grass. Drew came over, sharp suit, glass of bourbon in hand, pretending he wasn't checking his phone every 30 seconds. "You look good, old man," he said, half smiling. I smiled back, mostly for the child who called me Grandpa. He poured me another drink from the pitcher on the table. Amber, smooth, too sweet for my taste, but I nodded anyway. It had been years since he offered me anything without a lecture attached. Before I could lift the glass, someone's shadow crossed the balcony tiles. Maureen, Janelle's mother, walked out, elegant and curious as ever. "Is that yours, Dan? Mind if I have it? I'm parched." She reached for the cup, and I handed it over. "Please," I said. She smiled, thanked me, and took a sip as the sunset dipped behind the oak line. Small things like that never meant anything, until they do. The rest of the evening passed in slow motion. Sparklers, family photos, Drew and Janelle playing host while I stayed in the corner, watching the family that didn't feel like mine anymore. Around 9, people started leaving. I sat outside, listening to the cicadas, feeling that old ache that comes when the noise fades and truth starts whispering again. Before I go on, tell me, where are you watching this from? Because what happened next still plays in my mind like a movie with no pause button. Hours later, the house was quiet. My granddaughter slept in the next room, her nightlight painted stars on the wall. I went to the study to shut the windows when I heard them, voices low and slurred, drifting from the den. Drew's laugh first, then Janelle's giggle, sticky with alcohol. I didn't move. "She didn't even notice," Janelle whispered. "Your dad. He's too stupid to realize I spiked his drink. He'll be gone soon. Gone soon." Those 2 words didn't sound like a joke. They sounded like the drop of a hammer. Drew laughed loud, too loud for the hour. "You're wicked," he said, "but effective." My heart thudded slow and heavy. My mind raced through the night in reverse. The pitcher, the glass, Maureen's hand. She had taken my cup. I stood there frozen in the doorway, trying to swallow the truth without choking on it. My own son, my blood. They laughed again, Drew slurring something about the company, about the timing being perfect. I didn't need to hear more. The sound of their glasses clinking was enough to tell me they'd already made their toast to my disappearance. I walked back to my room on wooden legs, careful not to wake the child sleeping under glow-in-the-dark stars. Outside, the night wind carried the faintest echo of their laughter through the hall. They had no idea Maureen had taken that drink, and they had no idea that I'd heard everything. I woke to the sound of chaos. Tires screeched against the gravel driveway, and red and blue lights bled through the curtains like the house itself was wounded. The clock on my nightstand read 3:07 a.m., 6 hours since that laugh I'd never forget. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, but the screaming downstairs told me otherwise. When I opened the door, Janelle was in the foyer, mascara running, her hair clinging to her cheeks. "She's not breathing right. Please," she cried to the paramedics rushing past her. Behind them, Drew looked hollow, his tie gone, shirt untucked, face slick with sweat. On the stretcher lay Maureen, skin pale, body trembling like her soul was trying to leave first. I stood frozen on the staircase as one medic barked, "Move! We're losing her airway." My mind was a storm of images. The drink, her hand reaching for it, the words I'd overheard. "He's too stupid to realize I spiked his drink. He'll be gone soon." That's when the truth hit like a brick to the ribs. The poison, or whatever they'd mixed, was meant for me. And the woman they pretended to love had just swallowed my fate. I moved down the stairs slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "What happened?" I asked. Janelle wouldn't look at me. She said she felt dizzy. Then she collapsed. She stammered. Drew's eyes darted everywhere except toward mine. The paramedics wheeled Maureen out, oxygen mask fogging with each desperate breath. Janelle ran after them, sobbing, while Drew followed, muttering something about calling her sister. I stood alone in that grand, silent foyer, the same one where my father once told me, "Money can buy company, but never conscience." By the time I reached the hospital, dawn was leaking through the clouds, staining them the color of rust. I found Janelle slumped against the vending machine, her eyes raw from crying. "They're doing tests," she whispered. "They said it's something she drank." The sentence trailed off, like she realized its weight halfway through. Drew appeared beside her, holding his phone tightly. "Dad, maybe you should go home," he said, his voice shaking. "You've had a long night." He didn't realize how that sounded. Long night? I'd spent 6 hours sitting with the knowledge that my son had tried to erase me. The doctor came out, clipboard pressed to his chest. "She's stable, but critical," he said. Talk screens being rushed. Whatever was in her system, it wasn't accidental. His eyes swept between us. Did anyone else drink from the same source? "No," I said quickly. My voice cracked just enough to sound believable. The truth was fire in my throat, but I swallowed it. I couldn't accuse them yet. Not without proof. If I spoke too soon, they'd bury the evidence before sunrise. As the doctor walked away, Janelle folded into Drew's chest, crying so loud people turned. I watched them, wondering if he even remembered the words he'd laughed out just hours ago. The hypocrisy was almost elegant, grieving the wrong victim with the same mouth that cursed her. I stepped outside to breathe. The hospital parking lot was damp, the asphalt still holding the night's rain. My hands trembled, not from fear, but fury contained too long. I stared at the sunrise and made myself a promise. I would not confront them. Not yet. I would watch. I would listen. And when the truth had nowhere else to hide, I'd let it destroy them from the inside out. A few minutes later, they came out together. Drew's arm was around Janelle's shoulder, her face buried in his chest. I heard him whisper, soft but clear enough to cut through the morning air. "We'll still get everything once the paper's clear." The words hit me harder than the laughter had, because this time he wasn't joking. The morning after Maureen's collapse, the house looked like a photograph left in the sun, color drained, air stale. The birthday balloons still floated half-deflated near the ceiling, ribbons twisting like they didn't know the celebration was over. Drew and Janelle hadn't come home from the hospital yet. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee, pretending I hadn't heard what I heard, pretending I was still a father instead of a target. When the phone rang, it was the hospital giving an update. Maureen stable, but unconscious. I thanked them, murmured the right words, then hung up before my voice could betray what I felt. Gil had a strange taste, like metal and old paper. I needed air, but what I needed more was truth. I went into my father's study, the room I rarely entered because even after all these years, it still smelled like him. Cedar, tobacco, and authority. I opened the drawer of the old roll-top desk, the one that held every version of our family's fortune in neatly labeled folders. Jeffrey Holdings had been around longer than I'd been alive, and my father's lawyers treated it like sacred scripture. I pulled out the trust files, yellowing, heavy with paper that had decided the worth of men for generations. I wasn't sure what I was searching for until I saw Drew's name typed in crisp black ink across a clause I didn't remember reading before. Beneficiary rights subject to approval of the living executor, contingent upon demonstration of fiduciary competence and personal integrity. In simpler words, Drew got nothing unless I said so. A strange calm washed over me. The seed had been planted years ago. My father must have known this day would come. I could almost hear his voice echoing from the porch where he once sat polishing his old lighter. Son, never hand power to greed. It'll look like love at first, then take your name when you blink. I had promised him then, barely 30, thinking he was being dramatic. Now I understood. I spent the afternoon cross-checking every amendment, every trust revision, every signature, until one file made my fingers freeze. It wasn't in the original box. It had been slid underneath, newer paper, different watermark. A trust amendment draft dated 3 months ago. My pulse climbed as I unfolded it. The text was eerily similar to the clause I'd just read, except this one had been rewritten. It stated that upon my medical incapacity, those were the exact words, Drew Jeffrey would automatically assume executive control of all holdings and voting rights until a permanent transition could be approved. Below that, in neat but slightly shaky ink, sat my name. My signature, except it wasn't mine. I leaned closer, tracing the curve of the D. Whoever forged it had practiced. Maybe even studied my old business letters. But they hadn't gotten the pressure right. My hand always pressed hard on the W. This one didn't. The walls felt closer suddenly. My father's portrait seemed to stare down from above the fireplace, eyes burning through oil and canvas. For years I'd thought my biggest failure was raising a son who didn't want my life. I never imagined I'd raise one who wanted my death instead. I carefully slid the forged amendment into a separate envelope and sealed it shut. I didn't know who else might have copies, but I knew one thing for sure. This document didn't come from a stranger's hand. It came from someone who thought they already owned the world. The house creaked as evening settled in, long shadows crawling across the floorboards like secrets trying to find a place to hide. I picked up my father's old lighter from the desk, the one he used to flick whenever he made a decision he couldn't undo. I didn't light it. I just held it and stared at the flame that wasn't there. Because in that silence, I realized something that twisted deeper than anger. Greed doesn't just change people. It reveals them. And on that page, in that forged signature, I finally saw my son for who he was. The same hand that spiked my drink had already signed my life away. Jeffrey Holdings had always been a place where footsteps echoed longer than conversations. The building's marble floors and tall glass doors still bore my father's pride. Every detail designed to remind employees that legacy outlives men. But that morning, as I stepped into the lobby, I felt something else entirely. Distance. Eyes darted away. Greetings were cautious. Even the receptionist's smile looked rehearsed. Drew had been spending more time here than I realized. My calendar, once filled with board meetings and planning sessions, now had cancellations due to Drew's recommendations. The secretary I'd trusted for nearly 2 decades, Evelyn, met me at the elevator, her lips tight, her voice low. "Sir, I've been meaning to talk to you," she said, glancing around like the walls could eavesdrop. "Your son's been very active. He's held 3 meetings this week, with the board's finance chair and that attorney Janelle's cousin works for. None of it's on the official schedule." I pressed the elevator button, each floor's light reflecting off the polished metal like a countdown. "Private meetings?" I asked. She nodded. "And he asked me for your digital signature access, said you'd authorized it." I refused. The elevator doors slid open, and for a moment, I could hear my heartbeat louder than the hum of the building. "When?" I asked quietly. 3 days ago, she whispered. He said you wanted your letterhead for an urgent resignation draft. Resignation. The word tasted foreign, almost ridiculous, but also familiar. I remembered that forged amendment I'd found the night before, the one naming Drew as successor if I became medically unfit. The puzzle pieces weren't scattered anymore. They were forming a picture I didn't want to see. The doors opened to the executive floor. Drew's laugh carried down the corridor, confident and careless. The same one I'd heard that night when he thought I'd be gone soon. I stopped before he saw me. Through the frosted glass wall of the conference room, I could make out 3 silhouettes. Drew at the head of the table, Janelle's lawyer cousin beside him, and the chairman of the board, Mr. Lyle, a man who once toasted my father at every annual gala. I stayed back, listening to muffled fragments, transition approval, board confidence, digital filing. Evelyn pretended to deliver files past the door, catching my eye on her way back. He's printing something with your name, she whispered. I walked into my office, closing the door behind me, then powered up my desktop. It felt strange using the same password I'd had for years, one Drew surely knew. My inbox was filled with forwarded reports I'd never requested and internal memos referencing retirement proceedings. The audacity was almost surgical. I clicked open the shared drive. There was a folder marked Executive Transition. Inside, one file blinked with today's date. Jeffrey resignation w.pdf. My pulse thudded. I opened it. The letter was only half a page long. Formal, polite, lifeless. Effective immediately, I, Daniel Jeffrey, hereby resign from my position as Chief Executive Officer and transfer all managerial control to my son, Andrew Jeffrey, and below it, my name. My digital signature. My father's penmanship lived in mine. The stroke patterns matched perfectly, except I never signed it. I zoomed in. The pixel edges around the signature were faintly blurred, a lazy drag-and-drop overlay. Drew hadn't even bothered to re-render it properly. I sat back in my chair, staring at the lines that were supposed to bury my authority. My phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. He's heading your way. I minimized the screen, pulled up a quarterly report, and straightened in my seat just as the door opened. Drew stepped in, smiling that same practice smile. Hey, Dad. Didn't know you were in today. I nodded slowly. Surprise. He set a folder on my desk. Just keeping the ship steady for you. Thought you'd want to rest after everything with Maureen. He said her name like a prop. I looked at the folder he'd placed down, identical to the one still glowing on my monitor. My eyes flicked between the two, then back to his face. He didn't notice. He was already turning toward the door, humming. The moment he left, I reopened the file and printed it, 2 copies. One for evidence. One as a reminder that my own son was planning to erase me not just from the company, but from my name. As the printer hummed, I looked at the glass door reflecting my silhouette. My father once said, the hardest thing about power is learning who's standing beside your shadow and who's hiding inside it. Now I finally understood what he meant. By the next morning, I'd learned to move through my own building like a ghost, silent, unnoticed, and everywhere. The company I'd spent years rebuilding after my father's death was humming along as if I didn't exist. My name was still on the glass door, but Drew's fingerprints were on every decision. He'd called it modernization. I knew better. It was a quiet handover built on lies. I shut my office door and pulled up the financial logs. Years of contracting had taught me one thing. People can fake loyalty, but numbers never lie. I went through line after line of recent transfers, consultant payments, expense reimbursements, legal retainer fees. On the surface, it all looked routine, but one pattern stood out. A consultancy named Bright North Strategies had appeared 6 months ago. Small invoices, clean ledger descriptions, even an EIN that checked out. But the amounts, $7, $500 here, $12,000 there. added up to over $90,000. No project name attached, no deliverables. Just advisory retainer. I dug deeper into the file history. The contact person, Marcus L. Dandridge, same last name as Janelle's mother's maiden name. Coincidence didn't run in families that tidy. I leaned back, letting the numbers burn through my thoughts. Drew hadn't just forged signatures. He was funneling company money into his fiancée's network. I needed proof solid enough to hold in court. Something that didn't look like a paranoid father's suspicion. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Jeffrey, there's a call for you. Says it's urgent." Evelyn's voice carried the kind of quiet alarm that meant listen. I picked up. "Dan Jeffrey." A gravelly laugh came through. "Still answering your own phone?" "Huh?" It was Walt Lawson, my old foreman back from my contractor days. We hadn't spoken in years. "Heard through a supplier your boy's been making some bold claims. Told people he'd own Jeffrey Holdings by summer." My grip tightened on the receiver. "Where'd you hear that?" "Guy at the steel yard. Said Drew's been flashing his last name like a credit card. Bragging about a transition plan already in motion. Figured you'd want to know before it becomes truth." I thanked him and hung up slowly. Walt didn't deal in gossip. If he said Drew was talking, Drew was bragging. And bragging meant confidence. Confidence meant he believed his plan was already working. The thought made my stomach turn. I stared at the computer screen again, tracing one specific wire labeled consultancy fee, transition support. My cursor hovered over the attached memo. One click opened a scanned note in Drew's handwriting, his lazy slant impossible to miss. It read, "For services relating to transition preparation after incapacity." The word glowed like poison. Incapacity. The same word used in the Forge Amendment. The same one in that fake resignation letter. Every thread tied back to the same noose. I printed the document and slid it into an envelope, locking it in my briefcase. My reflection in the computer screen looked older than yesterday. Lines sharper, eyes harder. The kind of look my father used to have right before he fired someone he trusted. The office buzzed faintly outside my door. Phones ringing, footsteps pacing, the sound of people unknowingly walking through a crime scene built on corporate polish. Around noon, Drew knocked lightly and stepped in without waiting. "You okay, Dad? You seem distracted." I smiled thinly. "Just working through old numbers." He grinned. "Good. We'll need you sharp for the next quarter. Big transitions coming." He said it so casually, I almost admired his nerve. I gestured toward the ledger on my desk. "Funny thing about numbers, Drew. They never stay quiet forever." He frowned, uncertain if it was a warning or an observation, then shrugged and left. The door clicked shut behind him, and I felt the first true pulse of anger steady itself in my chest. For the first time since this began, I wasn't just surviving the betrayal. I was preparing for it. I opened a new folder on my desktop and titled it simply Truth. Then I copied the file, the payment proof, and every timestamp that would prove what Drew had done. Because the only thing deadlier than poison is evidence handled by the man it was meant to destroy. The Jeffrey boardroom always smelled of mahogany polish and ambition. The walls still bore my father's portrait, a silent witness to every deal made under his name. That morning, the air carried a different kind of tension. I'd been called in for an unscheduled health review, the kind of meeting no one in this family company had ever needed before. I already knew whose idea it was. Drew sat near the head of the table, wearing my father's old cufflinks like trophies he hadn't earned. Janelle's lawyer cousin, Victor, occupied a seat at the far end, pretending to be a guest advisor. Their eyes flicked between each other as I walked in, calm as a man walking to his own courtroom. "Dad," Drew said, flashing a grin meant for cameras. "You look tired. We've been talking about how much you've taken on since Grandpa passed." Maybe it's time you take a health sabbatical. Travel, rest, recharge. The suggestion was gentle in tone, but loaded like a weapon. Around the table, the other board members shifted uncomfortably. They didn't see his son showing concern. They saw a man staging a polite coup. I set my folder down and clasped my hands. A sabbatical, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like smoke. And while I'm gone, Drew's smile didn't waver. I just step in temporarily. Keep the company steady. Continuity. Continuity, I echoed. That's thoughtful. Inside, my pulse was a steady drum. Outside, I was ice. This wasn't the moment to confront him. This was the moment to bait him. I leaned back, pretending to consider the idea. You might be right, I said softly. Health does come first. A murmur rippled across the room. Half relief, half confusion. Drew looked both victorious and cautious, unsure if he'd actually won. I kept my expression unreadable. That's when I felt a light tap on my elbow. It was Mr. Lyle, the oldest board member left from my father's days, a man who'd seen more deceit in suits than in street fights. He slid a folded note discreetly beneath the table. I didn't look at it right away. I waited until Drew started talking about succession optics and press alignment before unfolding it. The message was scrawled in tight handwriting. Janelle's lawyer drafted guardianship papers last week. Your name's on them. Be careful. I read it twice, the words vibrating in my hand. Guardianship papers, proof of intent, a legal mechanism to take control if I were declared medically unfit. They weren't just plotting a power shift. They were preparing to sign me out of my own life. Dad, Drew's voice pulled me back. Are you listening? I looked at him and smiled thinly. More than you think. He gestured to a folder Victor slid across the table. This outlines the transition process. Just preliminary, no rush. You can review and sign when you're ready. I opened the folder slowly. The document was crisp, the paper heavy and expensive, like something made to look official enough to fool a court clerk. I skimmed the first paragraph and almost laughed. It began, given recent health and behavioral concerns, they'd already written the story. All I had to do was sign my name to make it true. Looks thorough, I said, closing it gently. I'll need my attorney to review. Drew's jaw twitched. You don't trust me? I met his eyes. I trust paperwork more than people. The room went still. Mr. Lyle cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Good practice, Dan. Due diligence protects everyone. I nodded, pushing the folder back toward Drew. You'll get my decision soon. By the time I left the boardroom, I could feel their eyes drilling into my back. In the elevator, I finally exhaled, unfolding the note again and reading it under the dim glow of the panel light. Guardianship papers, not power of attorney. Guardianship meant total control, medical, financial, legal. It was the same clause hidden in that forged amendment. After incapacity. Back in my office, I dialed the internal compliance officer. I need a quiet internal audit, I said. No announcements, no alerts. Start with all consultancy contracts from the last 6 months. Understood, Mr. Jeffrey, she replied. When I hung up, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, the city stretching out beneath my window like a reflection of my thoughts, bright in patches, but mostly shadow. If Drew wanted to see how far I'd go to protect what my father built, he was about to find out. The rain started before sunrise, thin, gray streaks running down the windshield as I pulled up to the law office that had handled my wife's estate years ago. The sign out front hadn't changed. Henderson and Rowe, attorneys at law. It still felt strange walking in without her beside me. She'd loved this building, said the mahogany walls made people tell the truth. Inside, the receptionist recognized my name and smiled with professional warmth. Mr. Jeffrey, Mr. Henderson will see you in a moment. The office smelled of paper and lemon polish, just like the day my wife and I came here to sign our wills. She'd worn a cream coat that day, simple, elegant. I remember her turning to me before we went in and whispering, "Dan, our son needs structure or money will ruin him." She'd said it like a prayer and a warning in the same breath. I laughed then, promised her Drew would turn out fine. That memory sat heavy now, like guilt soaked in old wood. When Mr. Henderson appeared, he looked exactly as he had back then. Gray suit, calm eyes, the kind of man who could make bad news sound reasonable. He shook my hand and gestured toward the conference room. "It's been a while, Dan. What brings you in today?" "I need to review all copies of the estate documents," I said. "Everything my wife and I signed. Every amendment, every duplicate." He nodded slowly. "Of course. May I ask what prompted this?" "I just need to confirm nothing's been altered," I said carefully. "Routine oversight." He studied me for a second longer than comfort allowed, but didn't press. He called his assistant, asked her to pull the Jeffrey file from archives. While we waited, my eyes caught the framed photographs on the wall. Families smiling after settlements, retirees holding certificates. All of them looked so sure of their foundations. I envied them. The assistant brought in 2 thick folders bound with brass clips. Henderson opened the first, flipping through each section methodically. "Here we are, original estate plan, trust agreements, will, codicils." He adjusted his glasses. "And this requested duplicates issued last month." My head snapped up. "Duplicates? To who?" He scanned the note attached. "Your daughter-in-law, Janelle Dawson. She said she was verifying family records for insurance updates. Signed by your son as authorization." For a moment, everything inside me went still. "You released them?" It appeared legitimate, he said, defensive but calm. Matching email, same digital signature. I forced myself to breathe. "Can I see the authorization?" He handed over a printed copy. There was again, my signature, perfect to the untrained eye. I studied the loop of the W, the slant of the D. It was identical to the forged amendment I'd found in my father's files. They hadn't just been forging my authority, they'd been collecting the blueprint of everything I owned. Henderson cleared his throat. We also processed a small transfer request shortly after. Nothing major, about $50,000 to a holding account. My eyes narrowed. "Transfer? From where?" He tapped the paper. "From your wife's charitable endowment fund." It said, "Administrative adjustment. You authorized it." My stomach turned. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't." He hesitated, then sighed. "Dan, your signature appeared on a transfer you never made." The words hung in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fuse. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, shaking the window panes. I stared down at that sheet of paper, my name used like a weapon. Henderson looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and restraint, the way a man does when he knows the truth will do more damage than silence ever could. "Do you want to contest it formally?" he asked. I folded the papers carefully, slid them into my briefcase. My voice came out low, steady, almost foreign. "Not yet. First, I need to know how far they've already gone." When I stepped back into the rain, the storm had turned violent. Wipers barely kept up as I drove home. My reflection in the window was faint but familiar, the face of a man finally understanding the cost of silence. They'd been rewriting my life, one forged line at a time. And now I had proof. There's a certain kind of quiet that only exists before a betrayal is exposed. That was the quiet in my house that night. Too clean, too deliberate, like even the walls were holding their breath. I'd invited Drew over for dinner. Just the two of us. Father and son. The kind of evening I hadn't asked for in years. He arrived wearing charm like armor, flowers in hand, a bottle of red wine that probably cost more than the truck I used to drive when he was a kid. "Thought we could use a fresh start," he said, placing the bottle on the counter. "Good idea," I told him, my voice steady. "Let's talk." Well, I didn't tell him was that my phone sat recording in my shirt pocket, screen black, microphone live. I'd learned long ago that truth, when cornered, only comes out in whispers, and sometimes you have to let it think it's safe first. We sat at the dining table, candlelight bouncing off the glass. He poured 2 glasses, filling mine first. I raised it slightly, let it touch my lips, but didn't drink. The same way I hadn't touched that balcony drink the night he tried to take my life. He drank deep, talking about everything but the thing that mattered: company growth, market projections, the future of our brand. But the alcohol loosened his edges. The polish started to fade, revealing the boy beneath, the one who used to beg me to take him to job sites so he could build something real. I watched him swirl the wine, his eyes half glazed, voice growing louder. "Dad," he said suddenly, leaning back with that careless grin. "You ever think about what happens if you can't keep up? Like health-wise?" I forced a smile. "Why? You worried about me?" He laughed. "Just saying, things have to move forward. You built this empire. It's time someone else ran it before it runs you." There was again that cold echo of entitlement that sounded nothing like the child I raised. For a moment, though, I saw the flicker of something real. Fear, maybe. The kind of fear that comes from knowing you've gone too far to turn back. "You were supposed to be asleep that night," he muttered suddenly, eyes unfocused. My chest tightened. "What night?" He blinked, slow and heavy, as if realizing what he'd said. "Nothing. I mean, the night Maureen got sick. That was messed up." Janelle freaked out. "You mean the night I was supposed to be gone?" I said quietly. He stared at me, trying to decide if he'd misheard me or if I just caught him. "You're drunk, Dad," he said, forcing a laugh. I didn't answer. I just looked at him long enough for him to drop his gaze. He started talking again, rambling about what's fair and legacy and timing, his words slipping like wet rope. I wanted to shout at him, to ask how he could hate me enough to poison his own father. But the anger stayed buried beneath something heavier, grief. Because as I watched him stumble through excuses, all I could hear was my wife's voice. "Our son needs structure or money will ruin him." He poured another glass, sloshing half of it on the table. "You made it impossible for anyone else to have control," he slurred. "You think it's love, but it's just pride. Janelle says the will can't change once you're declared unfit. That's the rule. That's how it's written." The words hit me like a gunshot in the dark. My pulse hammered in my throat. She'd said it so bluntly, so confidently. It wasn't rumor. It was fact. He leaned back, eyes half closed, mumbling to himself. "You'll see. It's all going to balance out." I sat there in silence, staring at the man across from me, the son I'd built with my own calloused hands, the heir who'd rather forge my signature than earn my name. The phone in my pocket recorded everything: the confession, the slip, and the line that sealed their guilt forever. When Drew finally staggered to bed in the guest room, I ended the recording, saved it twice, and locked it under my password. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to control. He'd set the trap with poison. I just closed it with proof. By the next morning, the sky looked bruised, gray clouds sagging low over the city, pressing down like a weight. I'd slept maybe 2 hours, but my mind hadn't stopped once. The recording from last night replayed in my head like a confession on loop. "You were supposed to be asleep that night. The will can't change once he's declared unfit." Those words weren't just guilt, they were evidence. I drove straight to Rita Coleman's office on Peachtree Avenue. She'd been my legal counsel since my contracting days, long before the Jeffrey name meant anything again. If there was one person I trusted to handle this quietly, it was her. She was sharp, discreet, and she didn't flinch when the truth got ugly. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything: how Drew tried to drug me, how Maureen took the drink, how I'd found forged amendments, and now the recording. When I handed her the phone, she plugged in her earphones and listened with the focus of a surgeon studying an X-ray. When the recording ended, she took a deep breath, removed the earbuds, and leaned back in her chair. "Dan," she said, her voice low but steady, "you have more than enough to bury him in court. But if we move too fast, they'll spin this. You'll look like an aging father trying to frame his own son to hold power. The board will side with whoever looks more stable." I stared at the skyline outside her window, steel and glass scraping at the sky like ambition with no conscience. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We let them talk," she said. "You act calm, unaware. I'll file for an internal corporate review, quietly. Once the auditors start asking questions, the real paperwork will surface. And if Drew's forged anything else, it'll come up there." Her logic was sound, but patience wasn't something I had left in abundance. "He's moving money through shell accounts," I said. "Consultancies tied to Janelle's family. I have proof." Rita raised a hand. "Then let's add financial misconduct to the mix." "But not yet. The louder they get, the more they'll expose themselves." I left her office carrying both hope and fury, one heavier than the other. When I got home, the house was unusually quiet. My housekeeper, Gloria, was dusting near the staircase, her face pale. "Mr. Jeffrey," she said carefully, "you might want to know, I overheard something while I was in the pantry this morning." I turned. "What kind of something?" She lowered her voice. Mrs. Janelle was on the phone. She told someone, sounded like her mother, that she needs to move the rest of it offshore before he acts. "I think she meant you." I felt the blood rush to my temples. "You're sure?" She was whispering. "Gloria said, but she said your name twice." I thanked her quietly, told her not to mention it again, then walked into my study and closed the door. Offshore accounts. So they weren't just planning to take control. They were preparing to disappear with the money once they did. I sat there in the dim afternoon light, staring at my father's old watch on the desk. The ticking sounded louder than it should have. There's a strange calm that settles in when you realize the people trying to destroy you aren't as smart as they think. They're just desperate. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Rita. "Audit initiated. Expect pushback. Also found something else. We need to talk." I called immediately. She picked up on the first ring. "Dan," she said, her tone clipped, urgent. "The internal records show a living will document filed 2 months ago under your name. It transfers medical and financial authority to Drew in the event of mental decline. I cross-checked signatures. It's forged. Sloppily, but enough to cause trouble if someone doesn't look close." I gripped the edge of the desk, the wood biting into my palm. "So he's already planted the paperwork for my incapacity." "Yes," she said. "If something happened to you tomorrow, he'd have full legal control before the ink on your obituary dried." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence hummed with realization. He wasn't just after power. He'd planned every step to erase me legally before trying to erase me physically. "Rita," I said quietly, "how long until the audit triggers internal alerts?" 48 hours, she said. "Maybe less if they panic." I looked out the window at the storm rolling in, wind shaking the branches like it wanted to strip the house bare. "Good," I said. "Let them panic." Because panic, I'd learned, makes the faithless reveal themselves faster than truth ever could. The morning of the announcement broke clean and golden, the kind of deceptive sunlight that makes everything look peaceful just before it falls apart. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting. The same cufflinks my father wore when he passed control of the company to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Today I was pretending to do the same, hand over the empire. Only this time, the heir didn't know the crown was lined with thorns. Drew had spent the past 2 days smiling like a man already in charge. He'd arranged for the local business paper, the community investors, and a few of his allies on the board to attend. It's time for a graceful transition, he told them. Dad's ready to slow down. I let him believe it. In fact, I encouraged it. Sometimes the only way to catch a liar is to give him a stage big enough to tell his lies in public. Behind the scenes, Rita had already coordinated everything. The internal audit was in motion, but today was about exposure. I'd sent a private invitation to Detective Clark, the same officer investigating Maureen's poisoning case. He would attend in plain clothes, blending into the crowd. His only instruction from me: wait until I'm done speaking. By 10 o'clock, the Jeffrey Holdings atrium was filled with polite chaos. Reporters setting up tripods, camera flashes bouncing off the glass walls, the board members clustering like sheep waiting for direction. The community had come too. The Jeffreys had always drawn spectators. When we built, they watched. When we fell, they leaned closer. Drew stood beside me at the podium, rehearsed charm plastered across his face. Janelle was in the front row, one leg crossed over the other, her phone half hidden in her lap. I wondered if she was texting her mother, or her lawyer, or both. He leaned in. "You'll start with a gratitude speech," he whispered. "Then I'll take over and talk about the company's future." I smiled. Of course. When the cameras turned red and the room fell silent, I stepped forward. "Good morning," I began, letting my voice carry. For over 3 decades, this company has been more than a business. It's been a family. And like any family, there are seasons of growth and seasons of reckoning. I paused, scanning the crowd. Drew's smile twitched, uncertain. "I've been asked lately if I plan to retire," I continued. "And the answer is yes. But before I do, I owe this community, our shareholders, and every honest worker the truth about what happens when legacy becomes entitlement." The room shifted, murmurs rippling through the audience. Drew's head snapped toward me, confusion hardening into fear. Somewhere along the way, I said, someone decided to rewrite the meaning of inheritance. They mistook stewardship for ownership, loyalty for weakness, and family for leverage. I could feel his eyes burning into me. I built Jeffrey Holdings from the ground up, not because I wanted control, but because my father taught me that power unearned is poison. That last word lingered longer than I expected. Even the reporters sensed something off in the air. Janelle's hand froze on her phone. Drew forced a laugh, stepping closer to the microphone. "What my father means is," I held up a hand. "Let me finish." Behind a flash of cameras, I saw Detective Clark standing near the back, hand in his pockets, watching like a man waiting for a cue. I looked at Drew then, directly, my voice turning steel. "To those who have tried to manipulate this company, to forge trust and signatures for personal gain, your season ends today." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Drew's face drained of color. He whispered under his breath, "What are you doing?" I smiled faintly. "Announcing retirement." Rita, standing off to the side, gave the smallest nod. It was time. I closed my folder and stepped back from the podium. Jeffrey Holdings will continue under leadership chosen by integrity, not inheritance. That's all I have to say. The applause was hesitant, confused, rippling through a crowd that didn't yet understand what they'd just witnessed. As Drew turned to me, mouth opening to object, a quiet movement near the back caught his attention. 2 men in plain clothes approached, badges glinting briefly under the lights. Detective Clark nodded at me once, then walked straight toward my son. The cameras caught it. The moment the air in the room shifted from applause to alarm. I stood perfectly still on the podium, my father's cufflinks glinting in the light, as the officers whispered something to Drew and guided him toward the exit. He looked back at me just once, disbelief cutting through his arrogance. And for the first time in a long while, I saw the boy he used to be, terrified of what he'd finally become. The atrium emptied faster than I expected. One moment, cameras flashed like fireworks. The next, silence fell like a curtain. Reporters scattered, whispering into their phones, some chasing after the officers as they led Drew through the glass doors. Janelle's voice broke through the noise, sharp, panicked. "You didn't do anything. This is a mistake." No one answered her. The doors closed, sealing the sound outside. I stayed at the podium for another full minute, not moving, not speaking, just watching the reflection of my own face in the polished floor. I'd spent years wondering what failure looked like. Turns out, it looked a lot like survival. By the time I stepped off the stage, Rita was already on her phone, coordinating with the detective. She caught my eye, lowered her voice, and said, "They're holding him for questioning. Don't celebrate yet. It's far from over." I nodded, the weight of that truth sinking in. Arrest was one thing. Conviction was another. Outside, the press had gathered like vultures. Microphones shoved forward, voices clashing. "Mr. Jeffrey, is it true your son tried to poison you? Was this a setup? Are the Jeffreys collapsing?" I didn't answer. I simply got in the car, closed the door, and let the noise blur behind me. Through the tinted window, I saw Janelle pacing near the steps, phone clutched tight, her eyes darting like she was trying to rewrite reality mid-sentence. At home, the house felt too still, the kind of quiet that hums with unfinished business. I poured a glass of water and sat in my father's old chair by the window. My hands didn't shake, but my heart did. You raise a child thinking your love can outlast their mistakes, until you learn some mistakes are love's undoing. My phone buzzed. Rita again. "They've begun forensics," she said. "Your son's computer, phones, everything." Janelle tried to delete her emails, but they've already cloned the hard drives. I rubbed my temple. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," she said. Detectives found a folder labeled contingency docs. Inside, medical guardianship forms, a living will draft, and that same digital signature you showed me. All forged, all tied to the same IP address. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "And the emails?" I asked. "Worse," she said. "There's one from Janelle to her cousin, the lawyer. It literally says, once he's declared unfit, Drew takes control. Make sure the hospital paperwork lines up." She tried to scrub it this morning. Too late. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Rita said, softly, "The media's already running it as a family feud. Father versus son for control of Jeffrey Holdings. They don't know the truth, just a scandal. Stay quiet. Let the evidence speak." "Silence isn't hard anymore," I said. "It's the only thing that still makes sense." That night, the news ran on every channel. They showed old photos of me and Drew shaking hands at company banquets, smiling under headlines that now felt like cruel jokes. A dynasty divided. Power, poison, and betrayal at Jeffrey Holdings. Gloria, my housekeeper, muted the TV halfway through. "You did the right thing," she said softly. I stared at the frozen image of my son on screen. His face pale, eyes hollow, escorted into a police car. "The right thing," I repeated almost to myself. Doesn't always feel like it. The phone rang again near midnight. This time, it wasn't Rita, it was Detective Clark. His voice carried the fatigue of a man who'd seen too many broken families. "Mr. Jeffrey," he said, "forensics confirmed the recordings and documents. Prosecutors are classifying it as attempted poisoning with intent to incapacitate. They'll formally charge him tomorrow morning." The words settled like stones in my chest. Attempted poisoning with intent to incapacitate. Not murder. Not yet. But enough to mark him in ways no father ever wants for his child. "Thank you, Detective," I said quietly. "Do what you have to." When the line went dead, I turned off every light in the house and sat in the dark, watching the city flicker in the distance. The world outside would call it justice. But sitting there, I felt something closer to mourning. Because justice, when it wears your son's face, doesn't look like victory. It looks like a scar you'll carry forever. The courthouse smelled like old wood and cold coffee, a mix of routine and regret. Reporters had gathered outside again, cameras trained on the entrance as though they were waiting for a celebrity, not a broken family. I walked in through a side door, past the flashbulbs and the murmurs, straight to the private conference room where Rita was already waiting. She looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable. "They're offering a plea," she said. My throat felt dry. "To what?" "Reduced charge," she replied. "Attempted poisoning with mitigating circumstances. Intent to incapacitate, not kill. If he confesses and cooperates, no prison. Probation, community service, restitution." I'll let the words settle. Intent to incapacitate. I'd spent months convincing myself that Drew hadn't wanted to kill me, just control me. It was supposed to make the betrayal easier to carry. It didn't. "Does he agree to it?" I asked. Rita sighed. "He's considering it. He still says it was a mistake, that he didn't mean harm. But the recordings, the forged signatures, the transfers, he knows what he's facing." The door opened. A deputy led Drew inside, wrists cuffed in front of him. For a second, I saw the boy he once was, the one who used to hold my hand at job sites and ask if cement ever forgave mistakes. But now his hands were shaking for a different reason. "Dad," he said quietly, sitting across from me. His voice cracked on the word. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Rita nodded to the deputy, who stepped out, leaving us alone. The silence between us was thick, awkward, almost sacred. "They said if I confess, it all ends," he continued. "No prison, no trial. Just community service, fines, counseling." Janelle already took the deal. My jaw tightened. "She confessed." He nodded, said it was her idea, that she just wanted to slow you down. "I didn't stop her, and that's on me." He looked up at me then, eyes red. "I just wanted you to trust me, Dad. You never did. Every decision, every meeting, you still treated me like the kid who broke your tools in the garage." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that trust was earned, not inherited. But the truth was messy. Maybe I'd held him too tightly to my mistakes. Maybe I'd been too proud to see how far he drifted. Still, pride didn't forge signatures. Pride didn't pour sedatives into a drink. "You could have asked," I said quietly. "You didn't need to steal what was already yours to earn." He shook his head, tears cutting through the exhaustion on his face. "I thought if I proved I could run the company, you'd finally see me as your equal. But every time I tried, you made me feel small." I sat back, the weight of decades between us. "You weren't small, Drew. You just stopped being honest. You can't build anything on lies. Not a company, not a family." He wiped his eyes with cuffed hands, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt you. I swear. I thought the mix would just make you sleep. A few hours, that's all. I didn't know Maureen would." I cut him off. "Don't finish that sentence." The memory of Maureen's pale face on the stretcher still burned too vividly. There were no words that could wash it clean. He dropped his gaze, voice breaking. "Please, I'll take the plea. I'll fix it somehow." Rita returned then, her professional calm filling the room like a mediator between two wars. "He'll sign," she said, sliding the papers across. Drew's signature came out shaky but final. When it was done, he looked at me one last time. "Does this mean you'll forgive me?" I stood, straightened my jacket, and looked him dead in the eyes. "You earned my silence, not my trust." The guard opened the door, and Drew walked out, shoulders hunched, head down. When the door closed, Rita placed a hand on my arm. "You did the right thing," she said. Maybe she was right. Maybe not. Because right and wrong had started to look a lot alike the day my son chose to poison his father in the name of legacy. Family court isn't built for comfort. The air always feels a little too dry, the fluorescent lights a little too harsh, like truth can't stand the warmth. I sat there in the front row, my tie pulled too tight, staring at the same wooden bench where I once watched Drew graduate from his first mock trial competition. Back then, I thought he'd grow into a man who believed in justice. Today, he sat 2 tables away, silent beside his attorney, avoiding my eyes. Across the aisle, Janelle looked worse than I'd ever seen her. Makeup half-worn, hands twisting tissues to shreds. The plea deal had stripped away the performance. There was no audience left to fool. Child Services had already filed for emergency review, citing both parents pending criminal circumstances and emotional instability within the home. It was the polite way of saying chaos had replaced parenting. My lawyer, Rita, leaned toward me. Just stay calm. Speak from the heart, not the paperwork. You've already won half the room by showing up. The judge entered. An older woman with eyes that looked like they'd seen too many families fall apart over money. The room stood, then sat again in a synchronized rustle of fear and formality. The social worker spoke first. Your Honor, both biological parents are under legal supervision for ongoing charges. The child has been residing temporarily with extended family. We recommend Mr. Jeffrey's petition for guardianship be considered due to demonstrated stability and prior emotional involvement. Drew shifted in his seat. Your Honor, he said, trying to sound composed, this isn't fair. I've taken care of my daughter since she was born. My father's trying to punish me through her. The judge raised an eyebrow. And yet, Mr. Jeffrey, it seems your actions put your father's life in danger. He looked down, mumbling something no one caught. Then came the school counselor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the soft authority of someone used to calming storms. She took the stand with a folder in hand. Your Honor, I've been the child's counselor for 2 years. In every session, she speaks about her grandfather as her safe place. When things at home were difficult, he was the one she called. He attended school events, helped with projects, and picked her up on days her parents didn't. Janelle started crying then. Real tears, not the kind meant for sympathy. I wanted to feel something for her, but all I could think about was the night her mother almost died from the drink meant for me. The counselor continued, her voice steady. Children don't lie about who makes them feel safe. That's the simplest truth I know. The courtroom went still. Even the judge's pen stopped moving. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my hands clasped in front of me. Your Honor, I began, I never planned to raise another child at this age. But life doesn't care about plans. My granddaughter deserves a home that doesn't make her afraid. She's been through more than any child should see. I don't want to raise her parents. I just want to give her peace until they can earn her trust back. For a second, the judge didn't move. Then she leaned forward, folding her hands. Mr. Jeffrey, you may not have planned for this, but you're clearly the anchor in this child's life. Temporary custody will be granted to you pending review. The parent's visitation will be determined after psychiatric evaluation. Janelle gasped, then stood so quickly her chair toppled behind her. No, you can't take her from me. She's all I have left. Her attorney tried to calm her, but she stumbled forward, collapsing near the bench, sobbing uncontrollably. Drew just stared at the table, his jaw trembling, eyes vacant. The sound of Janelle's cries echoed through the courtroom like a warning, proof that no amount of ambition could rebuild what greed had destroyed. The bailiff guided her out gently, and the room fell quiet again. The judge's gavel came down with a soft, final tap. This court stands in recess. I sat back, exhaling for the first time all morning. Rita placed a hand on my shoulder. You did it, Dan. Maybe she was right. But as I looked at the door where Janelle had been let out and the seat where my son sat hollowed by shame, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival disguised as mercy. Still, When the clerk handed me the custody order, I folded it carefully into my jacket pocket, proof that at least one thing in my family was still worth saving. Sentencing day didn't feel like justice. It felt like the quiet after a long storm, when everything's still standing, but nothing looks the same. The courthouse was half empty, just a few journalists outside, the same faces that had followed us since the arrest. No cameras inside this time, only whispers, papers shuffling, and the low hum of a broken air vent. Drew sat at the defendant's table, shoulders slumped, suit a size too big for his thinner frame. He looked like a boy wearing a man's punishment. Janelle sat a few feet away with her lawyer, eyes red-rimmed, a tissue balled tight in her fist. The distance between them spoke louder than any confession. They'd turned on each other long before the verdict. The prosecutor stood, voice flat but firm. Your Honor, both defendants have accepted plea agreements acknowledging attempted poisoning with intent to incapacitate, forgery of legal documents, and obstruction of corporate integrity. The words were cold, procedural, stripped of drama. Still, each one landed like a hammer. The judge glanced over her glasses. Mr. Drew Jeffrey, the court accepts your plea. You are hereby sentenced to 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and financial restitution to Jeffrey Holdings for legal damages. Violate any term, and incarceration will follow. Drew nodded slowly, not looking at anyone. Mrs. Janelle Dawson Jeffrey, the judge continued, you are sentenced to 12 months probation and loss of temporary custodial privileges. You will undergo parenting and psychological evaluation before any contact with a minor child. Janelle's tears finally broke free. Please, Your Honor, she whispered, she's my daughter. The judge cut her off gently. You made your choices, Mrs. Jeffrey. This ruling stands. The gavel came down softly. It didn't echo. It just ended things. Outside, the air was thick with the smell of summer rain. Rita met me by the courthouse steps. It's done, she said, adjusting her briefcase. It won't fix what they broke, but it's something. Something. I repeated, the word tasting hollow. I looked across the street where Drew stood under the awning, speaking to his probation officer. He didn't see me. Maybe that was for the best. Some distances are better left unmeasured. By the end of the week, Jeffrey Holdings reinstated me as CEO. The board meeting was shorter than expected, everyone eager to move past the scandal. I announced new bylaws that outlawed direct family succession without merit-based approval. No one objected. Nepotism had nearly destroyed everything we'd built. Mr. Lyle, the old board member who'd once warned me about Drew, lingered after the meeting. You did right, Dan, he said. Sometimes saving a legacy means letting it shrink before it grows again. I nodded. He was right. The company felt smaller now, but cleaner, like something reborn through fire. That evening, the house was quiet. My granddaughter was in bed, her small snores carrying from down the hall. The TV murmured in the background, a reporter summarizing the case for the last time. The Jeffrey family saga ends today with probation, reform, and reflection. They made it sound tidy, almost noble. If only they knew. A knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Maureen stood there, frail but upright, her complexion still pale from recovery. She wore a simple coat and carried no purse, just herself and the weight of what almost happened. May I come in? She asked softly. Of course. She stepped inside, glancing around like the house still remembered her. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same one where Drew had poured that poisoned drink months ago. I heard the sentence, she said finally. I wanted to see you before I left town. I owe you an apology. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything, Maureen. You were as blind to their plans as I was. She stared at her hands. But I drank what was meant for you. I've thought about that night every day since. The doctors say I was minutes from dying. Her voice cracked. If I hadn't taken that glass, you'd be dead, I said quietly, and they'd still be free. She looked up, eyes shining with tears. Maybe God chooses strange ways to reveal truth. I didn't argue. There were no words left big enough for what the truth had cost. When she left, I stood by the window, watching her walk down the driveway until the taillights disappeared. The rain started again, soft against the glass, like the world trying to wash away the last stains of deceit. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace, not because justice was done, but because survival had finally found its voice. The mornings had become slower now, quieter in a way I hadn't realized I needed. The chaos had faded into routine, the kind that didn't demand performance or survival, just presence. My granddaughter, Lily, was inside painting something for school, the faint sound of her laughter echoing through the open kitchen window. I was in the garden, the same patch of earth my late wife once called her sanctuary. Her roses had survived everything, storms, neglect, even the months when I couldn't bear to come outside. They bloomed stubbornly, defiantly, as if reminding me that beauty doesn't wait for peace to exist. I knelt in the soil, pruning the thorns and turning the earth, feeling more like myself here than I ever did in the boardroom. It had been 6 months since the sentencing. 6 months since Drew's eyes met mine in that sterile courtroom for the last time. Probation had sent him to a rehabilitation program, working with low-income construction crews. Irony the universe must have found fitting. Janelle had moved back with her mother after losing custody. I didn't hate them, I just couldn't carry them anymore. Some weights have to be set down to keep breathing. I still received updates from Rita every now and then, financial reports, board reforms, new bylaws being implemented. Jeffrey Holdings had started a new chapter without the shadow of inheritance hanging over it. For the first time in decades, merit meant more than bloodline. That had been my father's dream once. I just hadn't realized it would take losing almost everything to make it real. When Lily came outside, her hands were smudged with watercolor paint. "Grandpa, look," she said, holding up a picture, me kneeling in the garden, surrounded by red roses and a big yellow sun. "It's you and Grandma's flowers." I smiled, setting my gloves down. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." She leaned against my arm. "Mom said Grandma used to sing out here." "She did," I said softly, "every Sunday morning." She believed flowers grow better when they're reminded of love. Lily thought about that for a moment, her small fingers tracing the edge of a rose petal. "Do you think people grow better that way too?" I looked down at her. Innocence wrapped in curiosity, untouched by the greed that had nearly destroyed us. "I think that's the only way they do," I said. When she ran back inside, I stayed there, watching the sunlight spill across the soil. My wife's voice came back to me then, as clear as it had been the day she made me promise to raise Drew with discipline and grace. "Our son needs structure, Dan, or money will ruin him." I had tried to balance both, but I'd learned too late that legacy without humility is a curse, not a gift. A breeze rolled through the yard, carrying the faint scent of lavender. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, feeling something I hadn't in a long time: release. The past had taken enough. I was done letting it claim the rest of me. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I'd started something new, small at first, but it grew fast. A vocational program for young builders, funded through the company's outreach division. Kids from working-class neighborhoods learning trades, learning pride in work instead of entitlement. I called it the Jeffrey Initiative for Honest Hands. Every time I watched them build something from scratch, wood, metal, concrete, it felt like I was rebuilding myself too. The press asked once why I'd started it. I told them the truth. to make sure the next Jeffrey generation earns what they inherit, not steals it. As the sun began to set, I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. The garden glowed in that last amber light, the roses casting long shadows over the soil. For years, I'd thought legacy was about ownership, about names carved into buildings, fortunes preserved in ink. But standing there, surrounded by the things my wife had grown with her hands, I realized legacy wasn't something you protect. It's something you tend. Because what's built with truth doesn't need walls to last. I looked at the house, where laughter had replaced suspicion, where love had learned to grow again. The wind rustled through the flowers, soft as forgiveness. He poisoned my drink to take my legacy, I said quietly, almost to the roses. I used the truth to take it back and rebuild something worth inheriting.